What's the hardest family conversation you've never had?
I always thought the worst kind of betrayal would come with yelling. Maybe someone getting slapped. Maybe a drink thrown across the table in a rage, like in those dramatic shows my mom watched when she didn't want to deal with real life. But the truth is, real betrayal, the kind that cracks open the foundation of your family and makes you question who you are, it comes quiet. It comes in a soft smile, a clink of a champagne glass, and a calm sentence that feels like a knife pushed in slow. It was a Friday night, early spring, still chilly in Chicago, but the kind of night where people pretended it was warm just because they were tired of winter. We were in this Italian place, the kind with overpriced wine and cloth napkins that smelled like starch. My little brother David, yes, the same David who used to pee in empty soda bottles because he was too lazy to get off the Xbox, was standing at the head of a long table with a shiny grin, holding hands with his fiancée, Emma, like they were the lead couple in some Hallmark wedding special. The engagement party had been in the works for months. My mother had been driving everyone insane about the menu and the seating chart, and when I say insane, I mean I caught her color-coding napkin options at 2 in the morning like it was the goddamn White House Correspondents' Dinner. David was glowing, wearing one of those perfectly fitted blue suits that made him look even more like the golden child he'd been since birth. He always knew how to turn on the charm when it mattered: family gatherings, job interviews, funerals, whatever. Emma looked perfect, too. Graceful, elegant, sweet in that almost irritating way. She wore the soft blush dress and had her hair pinned back, just enough makeup to make her glow. She was what people call wife material, whatever the hell that means. And I was just Lisa, older sister, 39, married, mother of one teenage gremlin, showing up with a bottle of decent red and the emotional baggage of 1,000 awkward holidays. I wasn't the golden child. I was the one who used sarcasm like armor and always offered to help in the kitchen just to avoid small talk. So when my dad asked me to give a toast, I stood up, wine in hand, and tried to play the part. I made a joke about how David used to cry whenever Emma beat him at Scrabble, mentioned how lucky he was to have found someone with the patience of a saint, and tried not to let my voice crack when I said that love wasn't about being perfect. It was about seeing each other clearly and still choosing to stay. It wasn't much, but it got some polite laughs and a couple of ahs, and I sat down feeling like I'd done my part. That's when Emma stood up. She didn't raise her glass right away. She took a breath, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and then looked at me, only me. Not David, not the table, not the crowd of family and friends. Just me. And she said, calm as a Sunday morning, I know what you know. It was like all the air in the room got sucked into a vacuum. For a second, no one reacted, because no one knew what the hell she meant. Except me. In that moment, my heart dropped so fast I thought I might physically puke into my tiramisu. I tried to play it cool, but there's only so much a person can hide when they've been caught off guard. My hands started sweating. My wine glass trembled slightly. Emma turned back to the group, raised her glass, and added, "Let's stop pretending he's the perfect one." And just like that, the entire table shifted. Not physically, but emotionally, like a fault line cracking underneath our feet. People looked around in confusion, whispering, glancing at each other, and David, oh David, he froze. He smiled, that trained, professional, public-facing smile, but his eyes flicked to me, then to Emma, and back again. I knew that look. It was the look of a man who just realized the control he thought he had was slipping away like water through his hands. It wasn't loud. No one screamed. No one flipped the table. But there was this thick, sticky silence, the kind that makes your skin itch. Emma sat down again, gently, like nothing had happened. And then she picked up her fork and took a bite of her salad. I didn't say anything. Not yet. What could I say? Because here's the part one hadn't told anyone, not my husband Matt, not my mom, not even the voice in my own head at night. 2 months ago, I had walked into my dad's old home office and found David with a woman who was very much not Emma, legs wrapped around him, blouse open, like it was a goddamn softcore porno. And instead of doing what I probably should have done, confront him, tell Emma, blow up his life, I walked out and said nothing. I justified it. Told myself it wasn't my place. Told myself he'd confess. Told myself she'd figure it out on her own. Well, she did. And now I was sitting across from her, surrounded by people who thought we were just another happy family with engagement cupcakes and sentimental speeches, and I had no clue what her next move was. I glanced at my husband. Matt gave me this subtle look, part confusion, part suspicion, and mouthed, "What the hell was that?" I shrugged, as if to say, "Beats me," but we both knew I was lying. This was no accidental comment. Emma hadn't cracked under pressure. This wasn't the emotional outburst of a scorned woman. No, this was something else entirely. It was calm, calculated, controlled. And in that moment, I knew two things. One, Emma wasn't bluffing. And two, I had completely, utterly underestimated her. And the worst part? I still didn't know just how much she knew or what she was going to do with it. For the rest of that dinner, every single moment felt like walking across a frozen lake with the ice beginning to crack beneath my feet, and each polite laugh, each forced smile, each awkward bite of lukewarm chicken piccata was a reminder that the floor could give way at any second. I sat there with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt, watching Emma carry on as if she hadn't just thrown a live grenade into the center of the table. As if that soft-spoken little bomb of hers hadn't blown a hole in our family's carefully constructed illusion of perfection. My parents, bless them, tried to keep up appearances. My dad cleared his throat too often. My mom dabbed at her lipstick with a napkin that didn't need dabbing, and David, sitting next to his fiancée with his hand resting awkwardly on the tablecloth, looked like a man who'd realized he might be sleeping next to a stranger who knew more than she should. At one point, Matt leaned over and whispered, "Lisa, do you know what she's talking about?" His voice was low, but the tone cut through me like a blade. I didn't answer. I just kept chewing the same piece of overcooked asparagus for what felt like an entire minute, pretending like my stomach hadn't turned into a block of ice. Because the truth, the ugly, burning, uncomfortable truth, was that I did know. And the part that made it worse, the part that had started to claw at me from the inside the second Emma locked eyes with me, was that she knew I knew. 2 months before this nightmare of a dinner party, I had come home early from a work trip. My flight landed earlier than scheduled, and I didn't call ahead to say I was coming home because I figured I'd surprise Matt and maybe get a few hours of peace before diving back into the usual chaos of emails and meetings. But instead of driving straight to our house, I made the impulsive decision to stop by my parents' place to pick up a book I'd left behind in my dad's old study, a book that, in hindsight, seems like the dumbest excuse I've ever made for walking straight into a memory I wish I could erase. I let myself in with the spare key like I always did, walked into the house like it was still half mine, and the first sound I heard wasn't the familiar creak of the floorboards, but a giggle. A woman's giggle, low and breathy, followed by the unmistakable sound of a zipper. I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the doorframe. My first thought, ridiculous as it was that maybe my dad had brought someone over, my mom was out of town visiting her sister. But then the laugh came again, closer, younger, more familiar. And when I stepped around the corner and saw through the half-open door of the study, I saw David. My brother. Shirt half off. Pants unbuttoned. Standing between the legs of a woman sitting on the edge of the desk, her arms around his neck, her blouse undone. I don't know how long I stood there. 5 seconds? 10? Long enough to make eye contact with David as he looked up, his face falling in slow motion, the same face that used to convince our parents to let him stay out late or charm teachers into raising his grades. He opened his mouth, maybe to say something, maybe to explain, or lie, or plead, but I turned and walked out of the house without saying a word. For days afterward, I kept waiting for a sign that he had told Emma that he had come clean. But the engagement photos went up on Facebook, the ring got resized, the venue was booked, and life kept marching forward as if nothing had happened. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that maybe it was a one-time thing, maybe a drunken mistake. I rationalized my silence with 100 half-truths, all of which boiled down to the same cowardice. I didn't want to be the one who shattered the image of my brother that everyone clung to like a life raft. Now, sitting there across from Emma, watching her sip her wine like it didn't taste like betrayal, I realized she had somehow gotten there on her own. Maybe she'd found texts, emails, maybe someone told her. Maybe that woman from the office had sent her a message out of guilt or spite. Or maybe, and this is what twisted in my gut the most, maybe Emma had suspected for a long time and had just been waiting to see if I'd say anything. And I hadn't. After the plates were cleared and the polite small talk began to dry up, Emma set her wine glass down, folded her napkin neatly, and said in a voice just loud enough for the table to fall quiet, "David, how about we tell your family who Vanessa is? Or should I?" The silence that followed was worse than screaming. My father stopped mid-sentence. My mother's eyes widened, her perfectly manicured fingers frozen around the stem of her glass. David stiffened like someone had yanked the power cord out of him. Vanessa. The name dropped like a lead weight, and it told me two things immediately. One, that the woman I had seen in our father's office had a name, and two, that Emma knew more than just the vague outline of the betrayal. She knew specifics. David swallowed, cleared his throat, and started to say, "Emma, this isn't the place," but she cut him off with a single raised hand. Calm. Controlled. No shouting. No theatrics. Just that unnerving stillness, like the eye of a storm right before the next wave hits. My mom tried to recover with a brittle laugh. "Sweetheart, who's Vanessa?" Emma didn't take her eyes off David as she answered. "Vanessa is the woman David's been seeing for the past 4 months. She's 27. Works in his department. They meet at the same hotel off the expressway every other Thursday. Room 214. The room, if you can even call it that, collapsed. My dad started to speak and stopped. My mom made a sound like a whimper. And David, well, he did what David always does when backed into a corner. He lied. He said it wasn't what it looked like, that Vanessa misunderstood, that it was a moment of weakness, that he had ended it months ago, that he never meant for anyone to get hurt. The words poured out of him, each one more desperate and hollow than the last, and for a minute, it looked like he might get away with it again, that maybe this mess could be swept back under the rug. But Emma was done playing. She pulled her phone from her purse, tapped a few times, and set it on the table in front of her. Photos. Screenshots. Hotel bookings. Receipts. "You can lie to them," she said, her voice steady, "but don't insult me by pretending you don't remember." And just like that, the truth was out. Not just the truth about David. The truth about me. About what I didn't say. About how I watched it happen and stayed silent. When I looked at Emma across that table, I realized I hadn't just underestimated her. I had underestimated the strength it took to hold all of this in, to smile through every dinner, every photo, every wedding plan. And I hadn't done her the courtesy of treating her like someone who deserved to know the truth. I had protected David. Again. And now that decision was unraveling everything. I looked at my brother. His face was red, his jaw clenched, and his eyes locked on me, not on Emma. Me. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet but filled with venom. "Lisa," he said, "what the hell did you tell her?" I didn't answer. Not yet. But I was about to. And not in the way he expected. If you've ever felt the air get sucked out of a room not by violence or panic, but by the unbearable weight of truth finally cracking its knuckles after years of silence, then you'll understand exactly what it felt like to sit at that dinner table after Emma laid it bare, after she said the name Vanessa like it was a password to a vault of ugly, buried things we all hoped would never see daylight. My brother sat rigid in his chair, trying to pull himself together, working that familiar jaw clench he used as a last-ditch defense when the words he needed wouldn't come fast enough. And my parents were still frozen in that unnatural pose where the image they had of their son didn't quite line up with the words hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. And me, I was just watching it happen, watching it all go exactly the way I never let myself imagine it would when I decided to keep my mouth shut 2 months earlier. But something about the way Emma said her name, so calm, so confident, so goddamn sure of herself, made it clear this wasn't some emotional outburst, not some woman unraveling under the weight of betrayal. No, Emma hadn't lost control. She had taken it. Entirely. The way she leaned back in her chair, the way she didn't even glance at her phone again after laying out those receipts like cards on a poker table, The way she let the silence stretch while David floundered, all of it said one thing: she was prepared. She hadn't just found out about Vanessa by accident. She had known. For a long time. And she had waited, measured, planned her moment with the kind of surgical precision that made me feel like I was only now beginning to understand the real Emma, not the sweet, passive schoolteacher who always offered to bring dessert. Not the girl who blushed when David kissed her cheek in front of the family, but the woman sitting across from me now, sharp as glass and twice as dangerous. David tried, of course. He reached for that smirk, the one he used on cops during traffic stops and bank managers and girlfriends' fathers, but it faltered halfway, because even he knew there was no way to spin this. "Emma," he said, his voice low and rough, "can we not do this here? Can we please talk privately?" But Emma didn't flinch. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes locked on my father, and when she finally spoke, her voice had that same steady rhythm that made it clear this was not a request or a performance, it was a reckoning. "Vanessa," she said, almost like she was clarifying it for the sake of the audience, "was my best friend in college. My roommate. We shared a car for 2 years. She was at my bridal shower. Some of you met her. She even helped me pick out the dress." That sentence hit like a punch to the throat, and for a second, I thought my mother might pass out. Her hand shot to her chest in that way she always did when overwhelmed, the same way she did when she found out Aunt Cheryl was getting divorced or when our old dog died. And then, slowly, Emma turned her gaze to me, not accusing, not angry, just knowing. "The funny thing," she continued, her tone soft, "is that I didn't find out from him. And I didn't find out from Vanessa either." She let that hang in the air, and I swear, you could hear forks clinking 3 tables over. "I found out because I watched. I paid attention." There's a particular kind of tension between people who've slept together and are trying to pretend they haven't. It's subtle. But once you know what it looks like, you can't unsee it. I could feel my heart pounding so hard it was almost a physical sound in my ears, because I didn't know what she would say next, and the sick part was that I wasn't entirely sure whether I wanted her to stop or keep going. Part of me, the part that had lived in the shadows of David's charm for too long, almost wanted her to burn it all to the ground. David shifted in his seat again, his confidence deflating minute by minute, and said, "Emma, I messed up. I know I did. I never wanted to hurt you. I got in over my head. It was stupid. I ended it. She meant nothing. Please, can we not destroy everything we've built over one mistake?" And that's when Emma laughed, not a cruel laugh, not bitter, but a tired, almost amused chuckle that told everyone at that table she had heard every version of that line a woman can hear and had finally reached the part where it stopped working. "One mistake," she said, raising her eyebrows. "David, I know about every meeting, every lie, every Thursday lunch that wasn't lunch. I know about the necklace you gave her, the one I saw in our bathroom drawer and assumed was for me. I know about the hotel key you kept in your wallet because you're too arrogant to even hide it properly. You didn't just cheat. You did it sloppily. Repeatedly. With someone I trusted." Then she turned back to me, and this time, her gaze wasn't calm or knowing, it was sharp. "Lisa," she said, "I gave you so many chances. You knew, didn't you?" And there it was. The thing I'd been dreading. I took a breath and nodded, not trusting my voice to come out without cracking. "Yes," I said finally, because there was no point lying now. "I knew. I saw them." A ripple of horror passed over the table, like everyone realized they'd walked into a room filled with invisible landmines and had just stepped on the first one. My mother whispered, "Lisa," like she couldn't believe it, but of course she could. I wasn't the good one. I never was. I was the one who saw things and kept quiet, the one who watched and calculated and decided which truths were worth telling. Emma didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just blinked slowly and said, "I thought maybe you didn't know. Or maybe you'd tell me before the wedding. I even hoped you would. Because I wanted to believe someone in this family still knew the difference between protecting someone and enabling them. And I wanted to argue with her, I really did. I wanted to explain how complicated it was, how many versions of this conversation I had rehearsed in my head and chickened out of, how afraid I was of blowing everything up. But in that moment, all I could do was sit in the truth of it. Because she was right. I didn't protect her. I protected him. David stood up, too fast, knocking over his chair with a clatter that startled a few waiters nearby. "This is insane," he said, eyes wild. "You're just, what? Trying to humiliate me in front of everyone? Because you're pissed? This isn't justice, Emma. This is petty revenge." And Emma, standing now, too, as graceful and composed as if she were giving a TED Talk on marital ethics, tilted her head and said, "No, David. This isn't revenge. This is restraint. You don't know what revenge looks like." Then she glanced back at me, just for a second. And I swear to God, in that moment, I couldn't tell if she was warning me or inviting me in. And I didn't know which one scared me more. The strangest thing about secrets, the real ones, not the embarrassing teenage stories or the regrettable one-night stands you swear you'll never speak of again, is that they have a texture, a weight, a sound so specific that you don't even realize you've been carrying them until the moment they come close to being exposed, and suddenly they scream in your ears, dig into your bones, and make every inch of your skin feel too tight. And as I sat there in that expensive restaurant, surrounded by linen-draped tables and stunned relatives whose understanding of family had just been violently shaken, I realized that this wasn't just about David and his infidelity, wasn't just about Emma and her composed, calculated unveiling of the truth, and wasn't even entirely about my silence and the cowardice that had led me to say nothing. No, this was about something older, something deeper, a rot that had settled itself into the center of my family long before David ever laid a hand on Vanessa. Because while the others were still recovering from the fallout of Emma's revelations, my mother blinking too fast, clutching a napkin in her lap like a lifeline, my father looking suddenly, impossibly small in his pressed dress shirt, and David pacing beside the table like a dog trying to chew through its leash, I could feel the older truth rising in my throat like bile, bitter and undeniable. Emma had cracked open a window, but there was more, something darker that had been festering beneath the surface for years, and I could no longer pretend it wasn't there. And what pushed me over the edge wasn't guilt. It wasn't justice. It wasn't even moral clarity. It was the way Emma looked at me, cool, composed, unflinching, as if daring me to finally grow the spine I'd lacked for too long. So when David turned to me, full of fire and fury, his voice rising with that familiar tone of self-righteousness he'd perfected since childhood, "Lisa, for the last time, what the hell did you tell her?" I didn't hesitate. Not this time. I stood, my hands trembling just enough for me to notice, but hopefully not enough for the others to see, and I said, in a voice steadier than I expected, "I didn't tell her anything. Not about Vanessa. That she figured out on her own. But there's something else you should all know. Something none of us ever talked about. Something we all agreed to forget." For a moment, no one spoke. Not even Emma. And when my father opened his mouth, as if to interrupt, I raised my hand, not as a plea, but as a warning. "Let me finish," I said, and the room, already heavy with tension, grew somehow heavier. I took a breath that felt like dragging air through glass and began, not slowly, not with hesitation, but with the calm of someone who has waited too long to speak. 3 years ago, I said, my voice low but clear, David was reported for misconduct at his job. A younger coworker, 23, new to the company, barely out of school. She filed a complaint. Not once, but twice. And the company started an internal investigation. Now the air was gone again. My mother's eyes widened in horror, and my father leaned forward like he was about to say something, but I kept going. The complaints were detailed. Text messages. Comments he made in meetings. Late-night emails. Uninvited touching. The kind of things that are never enough for a courtroom but are too much for someone just trying to survive their first job. The company settled quietly. No admission of guilt. Just a payout and a non-disclosure agreement. David's face went pale, all the rage draining out of him, replaced by the look of a man who knows that his carefully curated version of himself has just been torn apart at the seams. "That's not what happened," he stammered, but even his voice sounded thin, limp, like it didn't believe its own story anymore. "I was there when Mom and Dad got the call," I continued, feeling a sharp heat rise in my chest that wasn't anger, but something older, something like shame. They asked me not to tell anyone. They said it would ruin your career. You were under stress. You weren't thinking clearly. It wasn't your fault, just a misunderstanding. And God help me, I went along with it. Emma was watching me now, really watching, her expression unreadable. She didn't look vindicated or surprised. She looked like someone connecting the last pieces of a puzzle she never wanted to solve. I convinced myself it wasn't my place to blow up the family, I said. I told myself that one mistake shouldn't destroy everything. But it wasn't just one mistake, was it, David? And I kept making the same one. I kept staying quiet. First with that girl. Then with Vanessa. And now here we are, sitting in the middle of the wreckage, pretending any of this was ever built on something real. David looked at my parents, desperation in his eyes. You said it was handled. You said it was over. And my father, always the fixer, always the one who thought problems could be managed with enough money and silence, finally spoke, his voice rough, tired, and brittle. It was a misunderstanding, David. We were trying to protect you. Emma took a step back from the table, arms crossed, expression colder than ever before. No, she said quietly. You weren't protecting him. You were enabling him. There's a difference. The table was silent again, and for once, I didn't feel the need to fill it. Let them sit with it, I thought. Let the silence do the work that words couldn't. After a long pause, Emma picked up her coat, slung it over her shoulder, and said, I'm not marrying him. That part should be obvious. But I didn't come here tonight for closure. I came to see if any of you were capable of telling the truth. Lisa, she said, looking directly at me, you were the only one I thought might. And just like that, she walked out, not hurried, not flustered, just done. The rest of us sat there like statues, each one carved out of denial, shame, regret, and decades of bad choices layered like sediment. David sank back into his chair, hands on his face, no longer the golden boy, just a man exposed, small and ordinary beneath the shine. And me, I stood there, still holding my wine glass, watching the door she'd just walked out of, knowing that no matter how this ended, I had finally told the truth. But the truth, as it turns out, doesn't always make you feel clean. Sometimes, it just leaves you empty, raw, and cold. Because while Emma had walked away from David, I couldn't walk away from the years I'd spent keeping my mouth shut. And now, with every set of eyes turned on me, I understood the full cost of silence. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to forgive myself for how long it took me to speak. There's a particular silence that follows the collapse of something you once believed was permanent, a marriage, a friendship, a family, a lie you thought was safe, and it doesn't feel like peace or clarity or even relief. Instead, it feels like the echo of a scream that never left your throat, a kind of hollow quiet that makes every ordinary sound afterwards, the clink of a spoon, the shuffle of a chair, the murmur of a waiter asking if everything's all right, feel intrusive, almost obscene. That was the silence that wrapped around the table after Emma walked out, and I remember standing there, still holding my untouched wine, feeling like I had stepped outside of myself. Like I was watching the whole thing unfold from behind a sheet of glass that kept me separate from the chaos I had just helped unleash. David didn't speak again. Not to me. Not to our parents. He sat there, bent over, his elbows on the table, his head in his hands, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, smaller than when he broke his arm falling off his bike at 9. Smaller than when he got his first rejection letter from that Ivy League school our father had practically built his future around. Smaller than when I caught him crying in the garage the day his dog died and he thought no one could see him. This was different. This was the look of a man whose illusions had finally caught up to him and laid him bare. My mother muttered something, an excuse, a plea, a prayer, maybe, before rushing off to the restroom, dabbing at her eyes with the kind of handkerchief she always kept in her purse, the one embroidered with her initials that made everything feel performative, like she could weep in high definition. My father stayed seated, jaw clenched, as if holding still might somehow prevent the past 20 minutes from becoming real, as if immobility could reverse time, pull Emma back through the door, unspill the truth, reseal all the fractures. But time doesn't work like that. And neither does guilt. The rest of the guests, mostly distant cousins, colleagues, and friends of friends roped in by obligation and free food, had grown quiet too, some pretending to be on their phones, others fidgeting with cutlery, and a few, mostly the ones who had always suspected something beneath David's polished exterior, just sat watching the scene with an almost fascinated stillness, the kind people reserve for car crashes they didn't expect, but somehow always knew were coming. I didn't wait for the check. I didn't wait for apologies or lectures or my parents to collect themselves enough to say something vaguely scolding, but ultimately empty. I walked out without a word, heels clicking against tile, coat slung over my arm, and by the time I reached the sidewalk, the air outside felt sharper, more honest, like the kind of cold that tells you you're alive even when everything else feels dead. Emma was standing by her car, not crying, not pacing, just leaning against the driver's side door like she had all the time in the world. When she saw me approach, she didn't flinch or straighten or pretend she didn't know why I was there. She simply said, "Took you long enough." I stopped a few feet away, still uncertain whether this was an ambush or a reckoning, and when I finally spoke, the words tasted strange in my mouth. "You knew everything." It wasn't a question. She nodded anyway. "I knew about Vanessa, yes," she said, slowly, like each word had been practiced, but not rehearsed. "I knew about the hotel. I knew about the necklace. I even knew that he lied to your parents about ending it. But I didn't know about the harassment. That part was new. Ugly. But not surprising." I studied her face then, trying to detect any sign of relief or victory, but there wasn't any. Just the same calm that had unnerved me all night. "Then why did you go through with tonight?" I asked. "Why show up, dress up, smile through the toasts, only to detonate it like that?" Emma exhaled, not dramatically, not for effect, just as a matter of fact. "Because I needed to see who would say it first. Him. You. Anyone. I gave everyone a dozen chances to tell the truth, and not a single one of you did until you were backed into a corner. I needed to know if there was anyone in that room who actually had a spine." There was no malice in her words, but they still hit harder than if she'd screamed. Because she was right. I could have said something. I should have said something. But I didn't. Not until it was too late to matter. Not until I was forced. "I didn't want to blow everything up," I said, not expecting it to absolve me, but needing to say it out loud anyway. "I didn't want to be the reason everything fell apart." Emma nodded again. "I get that. I really do. But you weren't the one who broke it. You just helped keep it hidden." We stood in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled with anything more. And then, after what felt like a full minute, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive, the kind you see on keychains or hanging from lanyards. She held it out to me. "What is it?" I asked. "Everything," she replied. "The emails. The screenshots. The photos. The text history between him and Vanessa. Records from the company he works at. Some of it came from a friend in HR. Some of it from Vanessa herself, once she found out who I was. She didn't even know she'd been used until I told her. After that, she was more than happy to send me what she had." I didn't take the drive immediately. I just stared at it, the weight of what it represented settling into my chest like a stone. "You want me to do something with this?" I finally asked. Emma didn't answer right away. Then, with a faint smile that barely reached her eyes, she said, "I want you to decide what kind of person you're going to be next time." And with that, she got into her car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving me on the sidewalk with a piece of plastic that could end my brother's career, shred what was left of our family's reputation, and maybe, finally, give some justice to a girl who was told to keep quiet 3 years ago because her pain wasn't convenient. I stood there for a long time, long after the car disappeared from sight, long after the cold started to bite at my skin, holding that flash drive in my hand like it was a lit match, and I didn't know whether to use it or drop it. I didn't go home right away. I drove instead, to nowhere in particular, just drove with the radio off, and the city lights blurring past me, thinking about all the times I had chosen silence, all the times I had mistaken loyalty for goodness, all the ways I had helped David stay untouchable because it was easier than facing who he really was. Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot near the lake, killed the engine, and stared at the water. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just breathed. And in that moment, I knew something had changed in me, something that couldn't be undone. Because Emma had played the long game. She had watched, waited, planned, and struck with surgical precision, not out of rage, but out of something colder, something like justice. But the real move wasn't her burning it all down. The real move was leaving me with the match. And making sure I knew exactly what it could do. And I still haven't decided whether to strike it. Maybe I already have. Maybe the real damage isn't in what gets exposed, but in what people finally admit they've been hiding. And maybe, just maybe, Emma wasn't the only one who walked away with power that night.